There was more positive coverage of local radio by the supposed rivals at ITV than by the BBC.
Yet another hectic assignment for Radio Durham reporter Ernie Brown. In the space of less than an hour and a half, he will have to drive the 12 miles to the source of his news story, find the man concerned, get him to agree to an interview, and rush the finished tape back to the studio in Durham in readiness for the lunchtime news programme broadcast live at 12:45.
A young Kate Adie was learning the tricks of the trade. She picked up her first lesson about TV. Just do what the director tells you.
It's all faked. Every walk in, every walk out, every bit of the studio, yeah. I mean, we were there and we did it. And we had to because we couldn't actually cope on air most of the time.
Radio Durham, 96.8. Soundsational.
We were the station who drove its radio car under a low bridge while the mast was still up. And we caused them a lot of angst. We were having a great time. I don't know if our listeners did.
Mike Hollingsworth is one of the leading figures behind the programme.
Joining Kate at Durham was Mike Hollingsworth, who'd been promoted from his job at Leicester. He was being filmed again, this time by the commercial competition.
I think probably the people who were really fascinated by what we were doing were commercial television. Certainly in Durham we had a lot of interest from Tyne-Tees Television, which was the local ITV broadcaster at the time, and it may of course have been that some of the commercial boys were hovering around looking to see whether maybe commercial radio was going to come in.
Time for another record. Bluebeat hits the north of England in the form of Mr. Jimmy Cliff, so uptight, out of sight, and everything's going to be all right.
When Granada filmed Radio Merseyside in 1968, they found a station ready for the commercial threat.
The worst of local radio is to have non-stop pop dedication programmes.
Gillian Reynolds was interviewed by Granada. She believes she knows why the film was made.
If you ever wonder why Granada Television was making a film about BBC local radio, it may, of course, be an intellectual interest. But it might just have had something to do with the fact that broadcasting was pregnant, and this time the baby was commercial radio.
Right, there it was, Revival and Lovers Everywhere on the Atco label. Time on Radio Luxembourg is 23.5 minutes past 8 o'clock, and green is for...
Commercial radio was popular, and it looked like expanding across the country. The fear for BBC local radio was that the government might abandon them and give out licences to commercial stations. Rival broadcasters were circling. One of them was the TV star Hughie Green.
We have put all these dots on here which represent the 115 medium frequency, which everybody can hear, medium frequency, low-powered local stations, which will be able to be heard both by day and by night.
To hit back, BBC local radio turned to publicity stunts. Radio Leeds handed their studios over to teenagers. It attracted plenty of media coverage and gave the youngsters a chance to shine.
And I really don't think anybody has brought this point out in our favour. And if we're not as good professionals as Gordon says, well, all we need is more practice. And at least we've had a go and has done us damn best, and nobody seems to say that for us.
Gerald Jackson was one of those teenagers. He was hooked.
I wanted some film of Radio Leeds. I don't think I was brave enough to do that during the work day when everybody was around. I used to work with a guy called Nigel Fell. Nigel and I were two of the youngest people on the radio station. So I did it on a Saturday night when there was just me and Nigel and a couple of other people in. And I filmed a bit of Nigel sitting at the control desk broadcasting. And then I think we collared it up, actually, because I don't think I was actually on the radio. I then sat in front of the microphone and he filmed me with my headphones on and doing a bit of chat as well.
It was a struggle, but slowly and surely, the news stations began to succeed, however basic their coverage.
I used to do it down the telephone for the reports, and then I would have do you remember a Uher tape recorder, the old German heavy tape recorder, and I would record some commentary into it during the game. and then bring that back and play it later as though it meant anything to anybody. You know, absurd, really. It's an absurd idea playing a delayed radio commentary. It doesn't work. Radio should be live if it's commentary. But we used to do things like that to begin with.
There were other achievements too. For their day, the new radio cars were cutting-edge technology.
Hello, radio car calling studio. Good morning, Jane Huff. This is BBC Radio Stoke-on-Trent. You'd like to play...
And one innovation was a real change. Local stations took a risk and allowed listeners to ring in. The radio phone-in arrived at the BBC.
You're not standing too near a radio set, are you? Jolly good, because that makes a nasty whistle, you see, if you do.
Radio Nottingham was the very first station, in fact, to use the phones. They started a phone-in.
Hi, Miss June, good morning.
We did the first radio phone-in. I know everybody claims to have done the first radio phone-in, but I know we did the first radio phone-in.
I wonder if you can help me, please. Or if anyone else can.
I have a dog. He's a crossbreed. He's 19 months old, but a very, very bad dog.
I have to say, I think we almost invented the phone-in, or at least we actually took to it like ducks to water, except for the fact when we started on Radio Durham, absolutely nobody was listening, so nobody phoned in.
Mrs. D. Nelson, D-double-E.
I'm not going to make an exaggerated claim because there are plenty of others who do that. We, on our opening day, tried a phone-in. We were on FM only, VHF, as it used to be called, which meant that only 40% of the population could even listen to Radio Sheffield. That was how low the ownership was. We didn't get medium wave until a lot later. So it was a real gamble doing a phone-in programme. If, you know, you've already got your hands tied behind your back because less than half the public can hear you.
Here's the weather now on Merseyside.
But local radio was close to its audience, and it came into its own in emergencies and bad weather.
We realised we tapped into something different. And local radio achieved lots of firsts. It found it could do things. And it was much more immediate than national radio.
Opening mic.
It's music through to 10 o'clock on Radio Leicester.
This week, our angling expert, Ken Dexter, talks
And this is Kit Coxon, welcoming you once again to District.
So to wake you up, a little Harry James and Monday Date.
The new stations had shown what they could do. The 2-year experiment was over. It was decision time.
This is a little moment of history in British broadcasting. BBC Radio Bristol, the first of a new generation of local radio stations, is coming on the air.
Frank Gillard had got what he wanted. The government allowed the BBC to go ahead with 20 local radio stations, all funded by the licence fee, not local authorities.
I think it was inevitable that once they'd started up and once the pilot period was over, that local government should pull out. Better for the BBC to be absolutely seen to be independent, felt to be independent, and to be able to demonstrate its independence.
And there we have it with the time coming up to 3 minutes past 11. You're listening to BBC Radio Bristol, your local radio station.
We did think we were achieving something and breaking new ground in radio, getting more voices on air and saying to a much larger number of people, radio's for everyone.
BBC Radio Lancashire.
With Gerald Jackson.
Very good afternoon to you, Gerald Jackson, with you live through till 6 on a...
Now there are 40 BBC local radio stations, attracting almost 8 million listeners every week. 40 years on, Gerald Jackson is still broadcasting.
BBC Radio Lancashire.
It is the people that is the thing that's continued. From the listeners we knew back in the 1960s used to bob into reception. I could give you another group of people exactly the same today in 2007 who come into this radio station and they'll just bob in for a chat or they'll ring up for a chat and occasionally they'll ask you to play them a record. It is the people, and that's what local radio is all about, isn't it?
Next on BBC4, Marcus Brigstock is back with a brand new late edition.